I want to talk about overcoming this tendency to embrace compartmentalized Christianity, or what I somewhat related camouflage, what I call camouflage Christianity. You know, that people look like the world on every other day except for when they're going to church. Like, people that, when it comes to the women wearing dresses and things like that, that most of Christians, that they might, if they do it at all, they're going to do it on their time of going to church. And that's a bit it, and that has a spiritual aspect to it too, I think, in the way we all, men and women, tend to look at Christianity. Oh, well, we go to church, but then we're going to go home and we're going to go work and we're going to go do this and do that, or we're going to treat people in a different way. That's a problem. But how do we overcome this? How do we overcome these things, our tendency to blend in with the world? Because we're not intended to blend in with the world. We're to be set apart people. And like, even in the world, when the Israelites, which was a mixed multitude, which I think has that could be a sermon in itself, that it was a mixed multitude that came out of Egypt to become to establish Israel. Because what made Israel Israel? The Torah, which you read in the beginning of Exodus about and this also applies to the Seder in some ways, the 4 cups, but in Exodus 6, and 7, I will deliver you. Well, let's start at the beginning of that verse. Say therefore to the sons of Israel, I am the Lord, and I will bring you out from under the burdens of the Egyptians, and I will deliver you from their bondage. So that's deliverance, and there's a spiritual aspect to that too, of spiritual deliverance, I'm sure. I will deliver you from bondage, which a lot of us are under bondage of some sort before we are saved, and we have to work that out of us over time. That's a cleansing process, of which Psalm 19:7 talks about. The Torah is perfect in restoring the soul, which is what all this stuff is about. That's why we do what we do, is restoring the soul, and to be set apart. In restoring the soul, we become set apart. I will deliver. Okay. I will also redeem you with an outstretched arm and with great judgment. And later, you have Moses wanting to see God, and he says, no one can see my face and live. I will put you in the cleft of the rock, and I will cover you with my hand, and you can see my backside, basically, my afterglow, or whatever you want to call it. He couldn't look into the face of God. But redeemed. That was what happened when they left Egypt, both in the Passover, which was the start of it, which is why Christ instituted the bread and the wine to and I believe he was talking about the Afikomen, which is if you study a Jewish Seder, it's the bread that was left for after the meal. And I believe that's what he was showing them, was what that afikomen, or for something for later, the bread that was set aside till after the meal. And then, of course, the wine. And that relates to Jewish wedding, accepting the marriage proposal. But anyway, I will also redeem you, which he did, with an outstretched arm. That's Christ, in my opinion. Then I will take you for my people, and I will be your God, and you shall know that I am the Lord your God, whom brought you out from under the burdens of the Egyptians. So, I mean, that in there's 4 cups of the cup of redemption, the cup of, one of them was the cup of wrath, which is what Christ took. And one was a cup of betrothal, which I believe is what we take part of as part of Passover. But he says at one point that you are my firstborn. You shall be my firstborn. Okay, Exodus 4, verse 22 and 23. Then you shall say to Pharaoh, thus says the Lord, Israel is my son, my firstborn son. So I said to you, let my son go, that he may serve me. But you have refused to let him go. Behold, I will kill your son, your firstborn son. And if you look at that as Satan, same thing. After we get away, Satan will come after us, just like Pharaoh came after the Egyptians. But part of that ends at the Red Sea, where Pharaoh's army is destroyed. Satan's army is destroyed. He can come no more. And ultimately, that's the lake of fire. Because Isaiah 33 talks about who's able to live with the consuming fire, who's able to live with continual burning. And how do we do these things? Like you read in Hosea 6:6, which is quoted in Matthew 12, verse 7. Or at least part of it is quoted in Matthew 12, verse 7. And this is something that is very important for us to understand, just like you read in Hosea 4:6. My people are destroyed for lack of knowledge, because you have rejected knowledge. I also shall reject you from being my priest, since you have forgotten the law of your God. Yet Peter says we're a nation of kings and priests, but which probably ties into this. And get away from that whole thing. And then Hosea 6, verse 6, for I delight in loyalty rather than sacrifice, and the knowledge of God rather than burnt offerings. So I prefer this. I prefer obedience rather than sacrifice, as it says in some places. And this kind of thing, we have to, how do we do those things? Sabbath is one of them. The holy days is another. The clean foods. And then you can read in Leviticus 19, and it talks about separating. All that whole chapter is about separating the holy and the profane. That's why they do the not mixing two types of seed together, not doing this, not because God sows one seed in our heart, but it's fighting the terror. And by embracing that, what you feed grows. That's what we need to be doing. He says in Matthew 11, verse 28 and 29 and 30, "Come to me, all who are weary and heavy laden. I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you, my Torah, my yoke upon you, and learn from me. For I am gentle and humble in heart, and you will find rest for your souls. For my yoke is easy and my burden is light," which you also can look at Psalm 119, 165. Talks about those who keep the law have shalom, basically is what it says. But obedience rather than sacrifice. And what makes us living sacrifices? The obedience to the Torah. That's what we're trying to do. That's how we overcome compartmentalized Christianity. Wearing dresses and skirts all the time for women. That'll change you. It will. Head covering. Crown for daughter of the King of the Universe. It will change you. Beards. This is not something that I can take on, put on or take off from time to time. This is here every day. And like you can read in Numbers 6 about the Nazirite vow. They were to grow their hair. Their hair here, but probably also their beard. And it was offered it was burned, I believe, at the end of it. And they were offered sacrifices, whatever. But it was a part of that it was like a dedication or a whatever to God, and that's the point. So let's come out of this. One of you can do the Sabbath, the holy days, the clean foods. Those are all important. There are daily things like ziziot, the tassels. Thinking in the Hebrew calendar instead of the Gregorian calendar. You can read in Exodus 12, verse 1 and 2, I believe it is, about it. This is the beginning of years for you. This is the beginning of months, basically the new year for you. And realize that matters, not the Gregorian calendar. How we dress, how we behave on a daily basis, and how we interact with God will also affect our interaction with people. We got to grow in both ways. It's like a pyramid and the higher the pyramid goes, the wider the base has to be. And the wider the base is, the better we deal with people on an individual basis, or maybe even group basis. But those are some suggestions for overcoming compartmentalized and camouflaged Christianity. Shalom, shalom.